Hey, welcome to the 127th episode of Just Shoot It, a podcast about filmmaking, screenwriting, and directing. This episode is brought to you by patrons Shane Collins and Ryan Moulton. I'm Oren Kaplan.
And I'm Matt and Oren. Today we've got writer Luke Del Tredici. He's got a new movie out called Arizona starring Danny McBride. It's a dark comedy with some thriller horror elements. He's going to tell us all about it. And he's also got an incredible comedy writing pedigree. He's an EP on Brooklyn Nine-Nine right now. He wrote on 30 Rock. And he wrote on one of my personal favorites, all-time favorites, Bored to Death. So he's going to talk to us about the nature of coming up as a TV writer and also balancing a film career at the same time. So it's a really great, in-depth conversation. He's so smart. He's so interesting. I just could listen to him talk for 3 more hours.
Yeah, I know. I kind of wish we dug even deeper into like how they form each episode of Brooklyn Nine-Nine and how the seasons work. But we talked so much about the writer's room and about a writer's perspective on a film and on a director, which we've had a lot of writer-directors on the podcast, but we haven't had a lot of writer-writers on the podcast.
He's directed plenty as well, but he's a pure writer and has a lot of philosophies about the nature of comedy and the nature of writing and the nature of making a network sitcom.
Yeah, so it's fascinating. If you've ever been interested in directing TV, directing comedy, I think you'll learn a lot about what TV producers and writers think about TV directors and their role in the whole system.
So it's such a good in-depth conversation. We wanted to make as much time for it as we could. So we decided to forego our catch-up. We'll catch up with everybody next time. And right before we jump into our conversation with Luke, we just wanted to bring up a little thing called our Patreon. It's been growing really well. You can support the show and support the editors and all of their hard work and help us pay them a little stipend for what's essentially volunteer work and help the show be consistent and put on live events. You can find out more about all of that stuff at patreon.com/justshootitpod.
And now, let's get on with the show. Well, hey, Luke Del Tredici. You are here to talk about a movie that you wrote that's coming out. Do you know when it's coming out?
August 24th. It's in some theaters and also on demand on iTunes and
Day and Date.
Day and Date, yeah.
Cool. And it's called Arizona, and it stars a lot of awesome people. Rosemary DeWitt and Danny McBride. Who else? Seth
Luke
Rogen
Wilson's
is in there.
Seth
Luke
Rogen
Wilson.
is. Yeah, it's great. It was such a good cast.
Yeah, an insane cast. And so we're going to talk about that in a little bit, but before that, we wanted to kind of talk about where you came from and what your background is.
Yeah, sure.
And so you're a writer. You're an EP on Brooklyn Nine-Nine. You wrote on one of Matt's favorite shows.
Bored to Death, man.
Oh, wow.
Boy, I love that show. I really cherish it.
It was so much. I only wrote on the final third season.
Okay.
I'll say that you are not the typical gender or age of a Bored to Death fan. It's
Really?
Oh,
that's funny.
It's a lot of like, my mom loved it. A lot of my mom's friends loved it. I think Ted Danson really worked for...
My grandma loved Ted Danson.
They were very attractive, like character and performance for women of a certain age.
Well, Matt
That's
loves
so funny.
Jason Schwartzman.
Yeah, that's true.
He's from that crowd.
And
nicest guy.
Hodgman is so funny too.
Yeah, it was incredible. I mean, and that was in true HBO fashion. We wrote all the scripts and then shot them, and so there was a lot of just hanging out on set. So hanging out with Jason and John Hodgman and Zach and Ted Danson. It's just like incredible. Just like sat all day and listened to stories.
That's awesome.
So let's go back even a little bit earlier. Tell us, what was kind of the first breakthrough writing job that you had?
I mean, it was like, it happened in fits and starts. I'd moved here to be a writer, and I got like, I think the first job was like a VH1 animated sketch comedy show I was writing on, which was like immediately apparent that it was a disaster because you had like a 9-month lead time, but they wanted nothing but pop culture comedy sketches. So you'd write something and then you'd be like, oh my God, like 2 weeks later, it was no longer relevant. And then you were like, this isn't going to air until a year and a half from now. And it was just, we immediately we threw out every sketch except for like pure evergreen comedy, which meant like we could make fun of Michael Jackson at the time. And then VH1 like signed some deal to make a biopic about Michael Jackson. And we're like, you have to cut all the Michael Jackson sketches. And we were left with nothing.
Just Donald Trump sketches.
Yeah, at the time, it's like, I think we wrote a lot of Britney Spears bits at the time. A lot of really fun people on that show, but it was short-lived. And then I worked on a bunch of other short-lived,
And
things.
how did you get on that show, the VH1 show?
I had an agent at the time. I had a writing partner, and we got an agent, and I don't.
Hold on.
Yeah.
Sorry, this is the type of thing our listeners
please.
are dying to know.
Yeah, someone's like, wait, how do you just get an agent?
Well, So I went to Wesleyan, which is not a film school, but like studied film, and my partner at the time and I we wrote a lot of comedy together. We knew we were going to come to LA. We after graduation moved to Boston, where I'm from, stayed in my parents' house, wrote a bunch of scripts so we would at least have something when we came out here.
Were you writing TV specs? Or?
Yeah, we were writing TV specs for some reason.
Of existing shows.
Yeah, at the time that was sort of the norm, and no one does it anymore. But we wrote a Simpsons spec and a Curb Your Enthusiasm and I believe a Scrubs. But at a barbecue, my writing partner met a friend of ours. His uncle was a lawyer, an entertainment lawyer. And he was very nicely said if you want to, if you do come to LA, send me your stuff. I'll take a look at it. And I'm the kind of person who is just I was like, that guy doesn't mean it. He doesn't want to help us at all. And my writing partner, who is very good at that sort of thing, was like, no, we're calling him. He got his number, was like, don't be embarrassed. He said he wanted us to call, so we should call. And he's 100% right. We moved to LA. We called him. We sent him the stuff. He sent it around to some agents, and they liked it. Our first agent was a truly terrible agent. He was at I believe it was then the company was called Major Clients Agency, which I think they thought was reassuring, but it was so embarrassing.
I thought,
right. No, really, it's a big deal. Clients.
They wouldn't put it in the name if it wasn't true.
Right.
It's
pretty official. Yeah.
When I got that first agent, I was he was an older agent, and I was like, this is good. I don't want some young 25-year-old cutting his teeth on us. This guy's been in the business. And then immediately I was like, oh wait, why is this 50-year-old man signing 20-year-old writers out of that shouldn't happen.
Right.
There's a reason he's we are at the bottom of the barrel. He should not have been signing us. So it was not a great professional relationship, but also we spent 2-3 years sort of working other jobs, trying to get writing work and not having it happen. And at least having an agent meant he couldn't get us work, but he could get us meetings, and taking meetings meant at least you felt like you were part of it.
Sure.
Right.
Yeah.
And when someone asks you what you do, you feel like you can say you're a writer because you have an agent. So that means you're a professional. Yeah, exactly. Regardless of how much money you're making.
We had a meeting on South Park and dined out on that for a year and a half.
Oh man,
he had not been hired by South Park was a big deal.
You were kind of close though.
Yeah,
sure, I get you.
Yeah, it was a meeting to cut out cardboard cutouts, but that doesn't matter. I just had an idea so obviously it used to be super popular to write spec scripts, and it's not anymore. But what if you wrote a insane Family Matters spec script or Small Wonder or something like a Black Mirror version of?
I do remember hearing
being cool.
This you probably know better, but I feel like somebody. There was the urban myth of someone who wrote a Friends spec way after it was done.
Yeah, I mean, I think at the time there was a lot of that actually of people being I'm going to write the Friends where Ross dies,
sure.
I'm going to and we're going to be naughty and it's going to stand out.
It's the one called the one where they all get AIDS.
Yeah, and then right. I think everyone's desk was a stack of scripts exactly like that. Yeah. Everyone is I read a lot of stuff for hiring for the show currently, and it's there's a lot of very high concept stuff that I think writers think is incredibly out there that they really think makes them stand out, and you read it and you're I just read 5 post-apocalyptic comedies. I just read they're all exactly the same. They have the same
jokes.
It's not even the same jokes. It's just everyone thinks they're standing out, and everyone has the same idea about how to stand out. And there's times where you're oh, just a really good character-based grounded show would blow my mind at this point, instead of something that you're this, no one's ever seen anything like this.
Right.
A sitcom set in the antebellum South, 4 of them.
Right. Yeah. What else are you seeing?
Oh, I mean, it's a lot of
post-apocalyptic.
People cluster. I felt this year there was a lot of political stuff. Stuff had
sure.
a very clear political edge. There was, that was, and it's good, but it's also what you're reading. In years where you read a lot of just really silly stuff with a lot of jokes. I just read comedy stuff, but you're kind of oh my God, I would kill for a script that just has a point of view and wants to say something, and the writer has a clear idea of what they want, and then. This year I was reading script after script after script where the writers all had clear points of view, something wanted to say, but they just weren't funny. And I'm just oh, just give me some silly fluff that has good jokes. Any script that makes me laugh, I'll take, It's a weird, you can't control it as a writer, but reading it, it's so much of your reaction to a script when you're reading it, I find, is based on what you've read immediately before the 2-3 scripts because I'll read 10 in a sitting, and it's just like, it's so unfair, but it's completely influenced by
what those other 9 are.
Yeah.
Right? Yeah.
Yeah. Well, that's how auditions. My wife's an actress, and I always tell her, like, if you're the first person in the room, like, do what the script says. If you're the last person in the room, change one thing. Like, give me something new. Yeah. Well, sorry to dive in so deep in the beginning, but now that obviously politics are on everyone's mind, and like us as people that work in the entertainment industry, I feel like a lot of times we're trying to have a stronger point of view or to say something, and
everyone freaked out and was like, "Oh, is comedy worthwhile?" Right. And so you're reading the response to that, I feel like, right?
Yeah, I think it's also just like, it's what's on people's minds. Ideally people are like, there's no way to game the system. Like you can't be reactive in terms of what my only advice is always like, don't try to write what you think people want. Just write what you want to write. And you can always tell if people are like writing in their own voice, or if they're trying to like, copy something, or if they think that they should be edgy, or if they think that they should be more political. If it doesn't feel like natural, you can always tell, I think.
And so like on Brooklyn Nine-Nine, do you guys like try to have like lesson, or like try to influence people?
The show is like, it's a very interesting thing. Like we have in recent years, like sort of dipped a toe into it like a little more. We did one episode a couple of years ago about like a racial profiling. They're cops, and we felt like it was a story that we could kind of tell from that perspective. We had one of our characters come out as bisexual last year, and did a pretty, like, for us, dramatic.
A male character?
A female character. A pretty dramatic, like, version of it for being a sitcom that's very, very joke heavy. But like, I think a little bit when the show started, our mission was like, we were very aware of it being sort of a progressive and diverse and a highly representative show in terms of there's like 2 African-American male leads who are both the people in charge in the show. There's 2 Latina actresses. The Andre Brower plays a character who's gay and has been out for a long time, and we were just very conscious of like, and
he's like an incredibly like masculine, like,
he's just like, for us it's always just been like, he's not defined by being gay. It's not none of his comedy comes from the fact that he's gay. It's just a fact in his life. He has a husband, but he has a full set of other personality traits that are what we mind for comedy, and his sexuality is just one thing. And I think for when we started the show, we wanted to be quietly progressive in terms of like not calling attention to that stuff, just being diverse, but not be doing big issue episodes, having this gay character, but not having to talk about it all the time, and do big issue episodes and very special episodes. And I think we were very successful at that. And then, but also like, we did do a couple like showier, we've sort of edged into some showier episodes that are more like on the nose about issues. And we have like, you receive more feedback about those because people notice them, and because, like, it's so, I like being quietly like revolutionary, but also like, it's really nice when you write an episode and people write little think pieces about it too, and it's hard not to fall into the trap of being like, people wrote about that one, we should do more of those.
Guys, weren't you paying attention? We've been doing this all along.
Yeah.
Well, is the audience pretty diverse in terms of like the political spectrum? And
I can't imagine it's diverse in terms of the political spectrum, just because of the makeup of the show and the way we approach issues. But it's certainly like, I think we're not a 4-quadrant like mega hit by any means, but I think we are a pretty good show about like, there's a lot of kids watch it, a lot of young like 11-year-old boys love it and also watch with their parents. I also think it like plays really well to like young women. It's like, I feel like a lot of the most hardcore fans are women, and also like, it's hard to make a sitcom that appeals to everyone, but we're trying as much as possible.
It's also a cop show.
Yeah, well, that's the thing. It's a cop show, so there's sort of like, when we were still on Fox, it paired with football pretty well, and it's played really well overseas for an American comedy. Like it does better than most American sitcoms, I think, because the cop stuff is so recognizable and easily accessible as a genre they understand, that it takes away some of the pressure that comedy normally faces when it gets translated, where the intricacies of language get lost and jokes don't really play, and cultural norms aren't the same. And so a lot of the sort of small behavioral observations just don't translate cross-culturally, but sort of jokes about how about New York cops, like everyone kind of gets it.
Sure.
Right.
I think also you guys probably do a great job of like diversifying the type of jokes that you do. So it's super dense, but also like There's wordier, more cerebral stuff, and then a pratfall in the same scene.
Yeah, I mean, that's definitely like part of it. A part of the success overseas is like, Andy Samberg's got a big goofy face and Terry Crews looks like a superhero, and they're big physical, they're both like really gifted physical comedians as well as, some of the like you say, more wordier jokes. And we do try to like, just as writers, it's nice because we can do, sometimes we're an action comedy, sometimes we're an office place comedy. We've had this huge romantic comedy sort of like bent throughout, like that's come and gone, and we can be different things. And you do find like different sections of the audience really respond to one or the other. But for us as writers, it's a way of keeping it not so boring now that we've done 120 of them.
Right.
In the midst of all this, 120 episodes, so you've been on since
season 1, yeah. I didn't. The pilot was created by Mike Schur and Dan Gore, and then I came on for episode 2 in 2013. Yeah.
Wow.
So that's like that's a long run. Like, there's not that many shows that get to do that nowadays.
No, it's crazy.
Yeah.
I mean, we got canceled and then uncanceled last year, but even then, it was like when we got canceled, it was like it couldn't be that upset at Fox. It was like they'd let us make 112 of them for 5 years. It was like this amazing opportunity, and I felt like, you wanted to keep making them, but also like we got to do what no one gets to do, which is just, stay employed and make money while doing something good.
Buy a house.
Yeah, exactly.
Have some kids, maybe.
Have some twins. Why not?
Yeah, sure. Why not? So what was your role specifically on episode 2? Like, where were you in the pecking order, I guess is what I'm saying.
I mean, I was, the TV writing credits are a boringly complicated thing, but I came on as a co-executive producer, which is sort of the highest level. Executive producers in TV that's the job you aspire to, unlike movies where it's often just money people or hangers on. But co-EP is usually the highest level you get to as a writer, unless it's either your show or you're running things. And so I came on with a lot of other, like a couple other co-EPs who were at the same level. And then Mike and Dan, the two guys who created the show, were there. It was a small staff then, and they knew some of the writers. They didn't know a lot of us, and it's a very stressful. I'd say the beginning of a show is really stressful, not just because you don't know what the show is, and every time you start a script, you're like, I don't know what any of these characters' core dynamics are. I don't know what any of their core jokes are. I don't know who they are. We aren't super familiar with the actors. You're starting the show, and you
don't know what they can do even.
Yeah, if you haven't been on set for the pilot, you have no sense of, it's like Andy Samberg and Audrey Bauer you can write for, but we had like these Stephanie Beatrice and Melissa Fumero who were like relative unknowns, or at least unknowns to us, and you're just like, I don't know. We'll just try something, and then 6 weeks later, when we start finally in production, you'll see them do it, and you're like, oh, they'd be better doing something completely different than what we wrote, and you have to adjust. But the start is also like, TV is very collaborative, and a writing staff is you work together intensely as a team of writers, which is great. But it's also at the beginning of a show, everyone is like trying to make friends and trying to work together, but also like subtly, I think, jockeying for position. And you want to sort of make sure that your voice gets heard and make sure that you like stand out, and you want to, because roles can kind of like calcify quickly. I mean, I think Mike and Dan, who run the show, are pretty good at not letting that happen, but there are shows where everyone gets locked into being like, you do this one thing, that's what you do, and that's what you're going to do for as long as the show is on the air, is you're going to break story, or you're going to be a joke person, or you're going to, you're going to like sit on the sidelines and no one's going to listen to what you say. But so there's like, it's always a little, at the start, I think it can be like a little agitating.
Stressful. But so it's day one, the pilot got picked up, you're in the writer's room, you're all together. What do you talk about? Like, do you know what the season is yet?
No, I mean, we never have any idea. Like, and Mike and Dan, Mike Schur, who came from The Office, who created Parks and Rec, has now created The Good Place. I think one experience that he had on for people who love sitcoms, like, The Office, the American Office, started as a very different show than it ended up being. The first 6 were much closer to the British one. Michael Scott, Steve Carell's character, had a lot harsher of an edge, and I think they sort of found ways to soften it, and the show really took off when they were able to tweak the tone a little bit, and maybe tone down some of the contempt that they had for their lead character. And I think similarly, Parks and Rec, I think Leslie Knope, Amy Poehler's character, started as more of she wasn't a villain, but she was sort of the butt of jokes
Right.
a little bit. And I think that show sort of found itself.
I always say Leslie Knope's flaws, that she's great at everything.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, like her enthusiasm is the problem.
It took, it took a little while to find that. And I think they had gone and wedded to this, like the idea of the pit for people who love that show and stuff. But,
right.
I think one thing that Mike had taken, I think, from those two shows was that, like, the lesson that you should let the shows find themselves, and that if you go in with comedies, with these things that you want to be long running and that you want to be on the air for 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 years, you don't go in with a strong plan and say, this is my vision, this is what it's going to be, because you get locked into it. And it has to be much more about, like, finding the writers' voices, finding the actors and, like, what they're able to do, like finding the sort of marriage between character and performer. And so I think he approached Brooklyn. They didn't come in at all with like this is the only thing the show is. This is our vision. Here's the plan. Here's the first season. Here's the first 3 seasons. Here's where we're going to end in season 5. It was very like, these are the things we like about it, but now let's sort of write it and find it, like, all find it together. And it's very inspiring, but also, like, intensely stressful, because you don't have a roadmap when you start.
And so are you, like, in a room full of whiteboards and they're, like, writing characters' names and some funny scenes they want to get to?
Yeah, and you just, like, I mean, as it starts out, it's crazy, because, like, now in season 6, you're just sort of like, someone pitches something and it's a story for Andre Braugher, and we can just be like, that's not something that Andre Braugher would do, and it's you're immediately, or someone pitches something, you're like, oh, that's a great idea, that feels exactly like his character. And when you're starting out, someone pitches something, and then you have to have a 4-hour conversation about whether that's something that the character would do or not, and what does it mean for the character. And it's especially, like, they always say that the second episode of TV is the hardest to make. And there's, like, there's this, Mike talks about it a lot, I think, which is that, like, when you're early in an episode, if you've done 3 episodes and you tell a story, the information that you give the audience in that story represents 35% of all that they know about the character. So if your, like, main character misbehaves a little, or acts a little, like, a little bit dumb or a little bit mean, or is jealous, like, if you're in episode 60, everyone knows the character. They know, oh, he's just a little jealous. That's a little bit interesting. But when it's episode 2 or episode 3, it's like,
he's the jealous one.
Yeah, you're defining the character that way for the audience, and you run the risk of turning them off. So there's, like, this intense pressure to find, like, what's the right story coming out of the pilot that, like, that will still be true to the characters, but not, like, show so many, you need flaws and you need conflict, but also, like, you don't want to be like, they're defined by this flaw and turn people off.
Right. It's really interesting. I think, like, I guess I feel like a lot of our listeners who, like, aspire to write for TV or to pitch shows, like, wonder how much of that stuff, like, they see someone like a Michael Schur sell all these shows, and they'll be like, he must know the inner workings of every character and how the season is going to end, and how when he's pitching the show, he must know everything.
I mean, I don't mean to speak for Mike, because it's also, like, I think that's sort of how we approached Brooklyn was there was some idea, but they were very flexible with what the concept was. I think with something like The Good Place, I mean, I heard from him, certainly the big twist at the end of the first season, he knew when he sold it. I mean, I think he pitched the first season. I think that show, which is shorter episodes, and he knew going in it would be shorter episodes, I think that's a different thing. I think he has had much more of a clear plan on that one. It's sometimes it's also you let the idea define you, and sometimes it's how much you know. But the thing that's certainly true of network TV, I think, is that making 22 episodes a season is just, like, it's crazy. It's just this, like, runaway train. You start and you have a little bit of time at the start of the year in the summer to get ahead, and you're feeling good because you have 5 stories, and then immediately you're like, one of them doesn't work, you do a big rewrite, and then you're backed up, and you're like, every week you just have to write a new story, and it's going to be shot in the next week, and it's, they're not these little, like, stage plays of sitcoms anymore. Right. They're like, they want them to be little movies, and it's not like intense effects work or crazy action on our sitcom, but it is like, we have to go out, we have to, like, it's real production, and we're just flying by the seat of our pants constantly. And I think the big thing is that, like, a lot of decisions just get made not on the fly, but like you don't have a lot of time to like, you don't have a lot of time to second guess. You don't have a lot of time to think. There are just things where you're just like, whoops, that didn't work. And sometimes sometimes you're like committing to a whole character. You think you have a guest character in a whole arc, and then you can't casting is like, sometimes we know who we're going to use and we write parts specifically for people, but sometimes we write a role and then we're trying to cast, and all the good people just aren't available because everyone who's good is busy. And TV, you don't get to be like, sure, we'll hold for 2 weeks because Tilda Swinton said she'd do it, but she's not available for a month. You have to be like, no, we have to find someone else. You don't have time to like wait for it to adjust. You just have to be like, okay, it's even like just shooting, even like with weather. I mean, it's why I don't know how they shoot in rainier climates, but
I just got back from Kentucky, and let me tell you, it is gnarly.
Yeah, but I mean, here, for us, it's just like, we have a 5-day shoot. If you can move days around if there's rain, but you can't go past those 5 days. Like, we can't just start pushing. You can't shut everything down for 2 days. You just have to adjust and find a way to make your scenes take place inside.
Well, so we saw that you had directed an episode of Brooklyn Nine-Nine.
Yeah.
Can you tell us about that? Did you enjoy that?
I did. I mean, it's the role of directors on TV is at least on sitcoms, which are traditionally not as sort of cinematic, and obviously this doesn't apply to big prestige cable dramas where I think that are becoming much more director centric and certainly like have specific tone and have real like cinematic aspirations. But on our show, I like how the show looks, but it's definitely like, we move really fast. We shoot with 3 cameras. It sort of has a handheld aesthetic. And, you try to sell jokes as best you can, but you don't get to do a ton of specialty setups. You don't get to like be really, really careful with how you frame up shots and how you put sequences together, because not only do we not have the time for it, but also a lot of it is editing. Every one of our episodes has to come out at whatever it is, 21 minutes and 6 seconds and 4 frames. The most painful thing about being in network TV as opposed to cable, I think, is that you cut an episode and it's great, and it's a minute and a half over, and you just have to get that minute and a half out. And it's like it should be so irrelevant, but it's just like and then you just start taking out stuff. You lose jokes, you lose air. The show gets a little too fast.
And then you're at a barbecue with your friend who has a Netflix show.
Yeah, and they're just like, yeah, they can do whatever they want. I mean, it's there are many reasons that cable shows are better set up to produce good quality stuff than network. But that's like, cable is not even the same as streaming shows, and that's one of them, or HBO, where you can come in kind of within a 3-4 minute window and they're fine. Right. But directing TV is like the writers are, we sort of, all of our writers are producers, and we encourage the writers. The writers who wrote the episode go down there in all the production meetings. They're in the concept meeting, the tone meeting. They're on all communications with the art department, with costumes, and they're on set, and they are largely, our writers have been there a long time. They have good relationships with the actors, and they also know the intent of the script. And so I always feel like, certainly on TV sitcoms, it's a partnership between the writers and the directors, because, ultimately the part is just like the writers who've been there now in a long running show, 4, 5, 6 years, like we have established relationships, and some of the directors are people who've come back year after year, but sometimes you get a new person and then you're just sort of like, I now have really strong relationships with the cast, and it's natural for me to just go talk to them about how a scene is playing or how a joke is playing. And I think the hard thing about being a TV director is the cinematographer knows the look of the show, and we have a set style. We don't break that style. The cinematographer is always there to say, we don't do that.
That's like, not the show.
Yeah, we're going to be handheld. I don't care if you want to be on sticks right now. I don't care if you want to do like a dolly. We don't do that. That's not the look of the show. And the actors have been doing these characters for 6 years, so you can work with them on a specific moment, but they don't like need huge guidance on who the person is. They've like lived and inhabited these people in such real ways.
And defined them.
Yeah, and defined them. So you can't like go to, on our show, Andre Braugher, and like, I as the writer don't have any insight that he doesn't have. And certainly if you're a director, you can't really talk. It's hard to win any argument with him.
Right.
And then you have writers sitting over your shoulders who are really like keepers of the jokes and trying to make sure that the jokes land, because we're the ones who get yelled at when stuff doesn't work out in the cuts. And so it's like, I think a lot of being a TV director, or at least being a sitcom director, is sort of, a lot of it is attitude and keeping everyone's energy up and making sure that you're like keeping an eye on the clock and making your days. Because it's all very like regimented.
But could you throw out an idea? Like, could you say to Andre Braugher, oh, wouldn't it be kind of funny if you picked up that stapler in the middle of that sentence and then just moved it, to this other desk?
Yeah.
Like,
I mean, there's all, I don't mean to say directors do nothing. There's like, like they like blocking scenes is so vitally important, like it seems like it seems like it's not, I think, for people who like imagine themselves, like when you imagine yourself making a film, you're like picturing like setting up the shot and like framing it up and you're sitting on a crane but it's like in comedy, especially to make jokes work, so much of it is the director's instincts about like just knowing where to place the people, because you understand what the script says and you understand like how the joke is going to play and which two people you want to have in the frame together, which two people you want to have playing across each other, how you want to have someone who pops in, which direction it's going to be funny as they come from. It all seems sort of unglamorous, but it's like it makes such a difference when you're in the editing room between like someone who's good at that and someone who's not good.
The other great thing that maybe it makes a show like Brooklyn Nine-Nine extra fun from that perspective is that because the lighting setups are much more general, right? Like it's kind of like big swaths of natural light. You get to move people more freely than if it was like a movie and then be like, okay, well, every time you set a new mark, all of a sudden we've got to, light that section, and then it becomes this
it's
whole
a lot
thing.
more freedom. Before I was on Brooklyn Nine-Nine, I wrote for 30 Rock, and 30 Rock was like one of the last sitcoms to still shoot on film.
Right.
They were committed to film. We shot, like we often just shot in one direction and it would have a big long turnaround as we relit. And it was like, I will never say anything bad about 30 Rock because it's just the greatest show.
One of the best shows ever. Yeah.
It was definitely like much harder to be flexible within scenes because, that you couldn't really do, that was a show where, the actors were not encouraged to improvise, even to sort of step off lines a little bit, and so then there's no sort of playing around within the scene and finding something, and you had to kind of block it and then have the actors be consistent in their motions because of the way it was lit. And you're right, on Brooklyn it's not a heavily improvised show, but we like a lot. There's a real looseness, and then we often encourage the actors to sort of play around a little bit, and because we shoot 3 cameras, because we're covering most scenes in both directions, because the lighting is pretty general, I think that like we're able to sometimes like find these really, like fun little surprising moments within scenes that we did not expect.
Right. And you get to do like whipping from one camera to another or like, knowing glances, the office-iness of it.
Yeah, and we really empower we have great camera operators who they're very engaged in the show, I think, because like they do a lot of the storytelling for us. Like, there's all these little like punch-ins for emphasis, and like they're not being directed on those. They just are like, they're listening and they're following along with the scenes and they're trusting their instincts about what kind of moves to do. And it's like, they're terrific at it. And it's like great how they're not just like sitting around waiting to be told what to do. They really like feel that they're part of what makes the show work creatively, and they are.
Yeah.
But would a director ever say like, "Oh, maybe punch in on this line"?
Yeah, of course. Like if you're watching the monitors and you think that you need emphasis on it, you totally do. But almost always, my experience is when you're watching it, they're on it. They have like, again, they've been doing it like day in day out for 6 years, and they're like, so much of what you feel like it like feels right about the show feels like what the show would do feels that way because that's what they've been doing.
Right. So you're an EP on the show, which is kind of like the best credit on a TV show. Does that mean you can direct any episode you want, or do you still have to fight for getting that directing?
No, you still have to fight. I mean, it's like, by this season 6, it's like, there's like a lot of people internally from the show who are now directing, whether it's like our sort of like, we have a non-writing producer who's sort of like just runs the whole set, who's directed it. Our post-production supervisor is like directing an episode. Another one of the writers is directing one, and then Dan and Mike created it often direct episodes. So there's like, you get fewer and fewer outside directors, but also directing, at least for TV, when you're assigning it, you don't know what episode's going to be what. It's same with getting writing assignments, but it's often luck. Like this is, I'm sure, different for Breaking Bad or something, but like where they're like, oh, that's going to be a big action episode. Get Michelle McLaren, make sure she's on like lined up for that. But we're just sort of like, you just assign out the episodes, and then you're like, oh, this one turned out to be like a really crazy heist episode, and this one is like 2 people in a room talking, and we have the exact wrong directors like lined up for that. But that's what we're going with,
right.
Because those TV directors make their living going like if you're really in it, they'll do, I mean, I don't know how many, but just they go week to week to week, show to show to show to show. And so a lot of it is this puzzle of fitting everyone's schedule together, and you can't just be like pushed by a week, we have something else. So the people internally who direct, we're much more like, because I'm going to be there the whole time anyway, they're sort of like, I get slotted in last, I think.
One last question about TV directing in general. Can you just tell us like a couple things that an outside director would make an outside director a good director versus like not so good?
I mean, again, I should qualify this as like, I'm talking about like sitcom directing, and a lot of it is also just like, I don't even know how universal that is and how much is just specific to our show. But I think the big thing is like, it's a lack of ego, because you don't get to just walk in and be like, this is my set, this is the way I want it. You're walking into a pre-existing thing where everyone has their jobs and everyone feels, the DPs always feel like they really have ownership of the character. The actors feel like they have ownership of the characters. The writers are always there. And I think the best thing you can do is just be like open to collaboration and not, I think the worst thing that happens is when directors feel that they need to come in and like put their stamp on it and show everyone that they're like, because
put their director's hat on. Right?
Yeah, I think it can be frustrating, because there's certainly my experience directing it was like, it's a machine, I mean, like the show gets made, like the show could like get made whether you're there or not. So like, if you have a freak out and you don't know what you want, like the production doesn't stop. And then somebody just steps in and is like, okay, this is what we're doing then. And so it's like, you almost have to like, I found the hardest thing when I was directing was to like stop the machine, to say like, I want something a little different than what we would normally do. It's like, it sort of works to just the actors kind of have a sense of like how scenes get blocked. The DP often sort of like knows how it's going to be and starts lighting even before you stepped in and said like, this is what I'm going to do. And so it's like, you have to kind of step in and say like, guys, I know we all just worked for like 6 minutes, but like, could we actually maybe just like swing this, actor around here and just like reset a little bit, and everyone's amenable to that, but you have to like, that's almost more the point where you have to sort of take ownership. But again, I think a lot of it is just not feeling threatened and not feeling like you have to make sure everyone knows that you're in command. Because the people who embrace working with the actors and embrace working with the writers and working with the DP, like, it's great because you have all these like super talented people there to collaborate with.
Can I ask one last question? Yes. I swear it's the last question, and it'll be a short answer. So how do you...
I can't promise it'll be a short answer.
Like, how do you choose an outside director? Do you look at reels? You have a good meeting with them? You get recommendations?
I mean, I had Dan and Mike do a lot more of the directing hiring. I mean, I think the people who work in TV, like, you kind of know from other shows. You get recommendations. A lot of those people are like really established and worked. As far as new directors, weirdly, like, my experience of hiring writers is that you kind of get to hire whoever we want. Like the within reason, like they want to make sure you're not like hiring your friends,
sure,
just to like give them high-paying WGA jobs, but
even still, it's kind of hiring your friends.
Yeah, it can totally be.
If your friends are good, you can hire them.
Yeah, if they seem professional. But with directors, the studio and the network keep like an intensely like tight eye, and there's often people who you're like, this person like, and they really seem to believe. I find they believe like that there's a real difference between directing, like, TV and features, and sometimes you'll find someone who you're like, this person directed like a great film that was at Sundance, and they're like, but have they done television? You're like, well, they did a great film that was at Sundance. I think they can come in and like handle it, and they'll be like, we really have to meet them, and they'll like for months be like debate about it before being like, maybe,
Sure.
Right. And meanwhile, you're like, they actually don't even have to be on set, and the show still works.
Yeah, that's right. It's really like we would be lucky to have these people with vision, but I think it is, again, it's like, TV, certainly network TV is like, there's a big, like, it's a corporate thing, I mean, there's a lot of money, and it operates on a strict schedule. And like the one thing you can't have is like people who don't understand, that, who don't understand that, like, we got it. We have to make our day. We have to make our week, because next week we have to make our days. So we have to make our week because because the cut has to come in by this day, because it has to be like, it has to be like sent out, mastered for all these different territories and sent out, and it has to be like ready for, the promotions department needs it by this day. So
there's no wiggle room.
You guys don't like risk.
Yeah. I mean,
the job is make the day. That's it.
Yeah. I mean, and it's like, you want it to be good, but it is like, they are, I think, not unreasonably like scared about getting someone who's going to be in there and like, and maybe just like want to be, I don't want to say too artistic because that implies that like what we do is not artistic. But if
right, they want to do 30 takes to get something.
Yeah,
perfect.
and you don't know with people, even when they've made like incredibly good quality film, if they haven't worked within that that context, I think there's a little fear, and I think that everyone who did that would immediately figure out what it was and do a great job. But I'm sure it's like every studio has had like one time they hired some hotshot filmmaker who had made a movie that did great, that like. And then they came in and like just made the actors do 40 takes, and everyone got pissed off, and then they had to spend $1 million in overages, and then they're just like, never again. It's only going to be like the
Joss
same.
Whedon in to fix this.
It's going to be the same, 5 people directing every episode, and that's it.
Right. You are in this like crazy intense 22 episodes a year, high budget network TV job, and somehow in the middle of
movie, right?
You write an indie film.
The key is to write it 9 years ago and then just wait around.
I was going to ask you about that because it does take place in 2008.
Yeah, it's a period piece now. It wasn't a period piece.
Before we go much further, tell us a little bit about what the movie Arizona is about.
All right, I can guess the logline if you want, which is something I've been doing lately.
Please.
I'm terrible at it. I watched the movie today.
Oh, okay.
So Arizona is a horror comedy that takes place in 2008 Arizona, right after the huge housing market crash, and it plays out in a ghost town, pretty much, of McMansions in this development, and there's an eerie balance between the times and the markets and what that did to people emotionally by having their $1 million houses, be worth nothing the next day, but it's balanced with this like crazy comedy of people that are like customizing their new homes, and with Danny McBride and just fun and craziness.
That seems great. I'm glad that I thought when you said you were going to guess the log line that you were going to have like a really tight, short log line. Because that's how it sounds like when I describe it. I go on and I'm like, I'm so bad at.
No, I'm just making it up on the spot. But our last few guests, I had watched the screener right before the interview, and I guessed the log line.
Exactly, perfect.
And now it's a game. Yeah.
Now it's a game. Yeah.
Great.
No, I mean it's been a really fun process, but again, I mean it's set it's now 2018, and I wrote it in 2009. I started it. I think I finished it in 2010. And even then, I was a little bit like, it really should be set. It's set right after the crash of 2007, probably like a year after. So I was already feeling like, I'm late, and then. It was a movie that looked like it was going to get made for a long time and didn't get made, and then fell apart, and then looked like it was totally dead. And I was just working in TV, and every, year, even though people sort of were still interested in the script, I felt like, it was a huge mistake to write something that was like timely, because as soon as it doesn't get made in the timely fashion, you're like, now it's useless.
Right.
But I wrote it thinking a lot about the role of economic anxiety. It's a loaded phrase now, but on like a certain kind of like conservative American male, and what it meant to have been like promised this like really shitty American dream of big houses and hot wives, and then to like feel like that's being taken from you. And I felt like there was a lot of focus when I wrote it on people who were suffering, rightly so, who lost it, but also like I was sort of fascinated by these like people who I found less sympathetic, who were just like angry and just like felt like they deserved to have this big house,
entitled,
and they deserved to have this life, and having had it taken from them, especially men, felt like so angry and emasculated. And I'm always sort of like, I love genre stuff, but I'm not super interested in like, bringing in. You don't need zombies, and like the world is super scary, and you don't need zombies or like, vampires or weird ghosts or like shadow creatures or whatever. It's like people are scary, and I trying to make a movie where someone kills someone, you're always like, what is it that would drive someone to like kill? And it's like that level of anger, but.
Right, and there are kind of hints, at least in how the film ended up being like kind of a zombie, like a wasteland 28 days later.
Yeah, and
even though there's nothing supernatural in it.
Yeah, that's the goal. But again, like I think the hope was to sort of make it a real, structured like a horror film, but rooted in the things that I found really scary about American life, but again, the thing is like all that stuff about the way that people responded to this like collapse of their dream, I think became like, as we've entered into this Trump era, has only become like weirdly more timely. And I feel like it ended up, like Danny McBride is sort of the perfect actor for the for like the Trump years, he's like no one you can have. And I really love it when movies can sort of like combine comedy and horror, or comedy and thrills, and like not in a I really like it when movies don't just like balance. People always talk about black comedy as like having to balance the two tones, and like I don't find balance to be the goal. Like I want you to be settling into a comedy and then have something horrible happen, and then you're settling into a horrible, like you're like, okay, this is a scary movie, and then it's really funny, and I think it makes the laughs more bigger and makes the scares bigger. And I feel like this weird era we live in is one where you wake up every day and you're like, oh, we live in some stupid, absurdist comedy, and yet we also live in the scariest time on earth. And like, it feels to me like the right time for movies that can
hilarious nightmare.
Hilarious nightmare.
And it totally, that actually I had listed, and written a few questions out for you, and one of them was like, how do you balance those two things? Because there is like, a scene where someone has just like murdered someone and holding someone else hostage, and then he's considering which tiles he should use for his countertop.
Yeah. And that's, look, it's I really like it, but I can't say that some people don't, not just in terms of this movie, but like a lot of the movies that I like thought about a lot as I was writing it, and movies I admired. One of the reasons I was so excited to work with Danny and with the guys from Rough House, which is his company with David Gordon Green and Jody Hill, is like they'd made Observe and Report, which is one of my favorite movies. That is just like,
I love Observe.
It's the best. It's so incredible. But a lot of people just like, certainly at the time, and I think still like, are really upset by that movie because it comes on like it's going to be really funny, and it is really funny, but you're like, it's funny, this is safe, and then it just gets so dark, and it's really a movie with some real anger in it. And like, I love that, because for me, I'm just like, oh, this movie, like, it shocked me, like it literally like knocked me on my ass. I was so surprised by what it was, but it's that
I shouted, "Oh fuck!" out loud in the middle of
but there are people who just
in front of my in-laws, I should say.
But I think a lot of people just they want to know what a movie is, and
right. But I think I've definitely seen movies where you think it's one thing, you think it's going to be a teen comedy, and it ends up being whatever, like an insane other movie. I felt like with yours, because you have a Danny McBride, he can be hilarious and scary at the same time, And and it's not two different modes.
Have we seen
like
him
Danny
menace that way before, though? I'm trying to think.
He's like in The End of the World. What's that one?
Yeah, that's like that's such a the
stakes aren't
fear
the same.
isn't quite as like strong. He's great. Like I wrote it knowing that like I wanted him to do it. I didn't know Danny when I wrote it, but like it was always clear to me that he could do it. The thing for me the other thing that makes, I think, him a great movie for like the Trump era, at least I hope a great movie for the Trump era, is that, I was sort of fascinated by the idea of like, I feel like since Silence of the Lambs, we've had, we've had whatever it is, 30 years of like brilliant, like mastermind psychopaths who are playing cat and mouse games with the hero or with the cop and have it all planned out. And it's just like, what's scary is dumb people.
Right, sure.
Like dumb people who are like unpredictable and make bad decisions, but still own guns. Like that's like what I find really like, I really crystallized for me with this, like, is it not it's not a great movie, but this movie P2, which is like a really kind of low rent horror movie where Wes Bentley plays he's like a guy he's like a parking garage like attendant who kidnaps this woman, who he's like fall in love with, who works high up on the tower, and he like kidnaps her over like a Thanksgiving weekend or something, and she's stuck below ground with him, and it's like he's just such a dummy in the movie, and it like stuck with me. I was like, it's a movie no one saw, no one loved it. I was just like, it's so endlessly fascinating because he's just dumb. Like he thinks she might like him. She's able to constantly like outsmart him by you doing the stupidest stuff. But he's no less like, he's really scary, and he's scary for it because he's dumb, and he doesn't like being made to feel that he's dumb, and he really lashes out. And that's like a thing that always stuck with me. And I thought Danny was sort of the perfect person to like embody that, because you're like, he can be buffoonish and ridiculous, but if he has a gun.
Yeah. I actually have a friend that is like pretty much exactly that character. He bought a house in Queens Creek, Arizona. He was not making a lot of money. He was working like in security. and he had this like giant house, and he's like, yeah, we decided to go with a 3-bedroom model, and we're just doing like a wash, whatever. We're going to get a pool installed. And I was like, how are you buying this giant house, but you don't make any money? Like, and then the next year he's like, my house is worth twice as much. We refinanced, had kids, got 3 dogs, bought a minivan. And I was like, okay, just none of this makes sense. And then the next year it was like, they're building a freeway through my neighborhood.
That's great. I mean, the real stories of these places in Arizona, like in the exurbs outside Phoenix, are just like, it's stuff that doesn't even make it into the movie. But like, not only, there are these new build ghost towns where they just completed them right as the bottom fell out. So basically no one had moved in, or the few people that had moved in, suddenly their house was worth nothing. They couldn't get out, and they're living in with no one around. And that's sort of like scary enough, but they're also like, a lot of times they're like built with like only one access road to the freeways that always floods. They're like,
and there's no stores. Like where my friend lived, you had to drive like 30 minutes to the nearest like grocery store.
Yeah,
and they were building a Walmart, but then they stopped.
Yeah, there's nothing there. And there's like the detail that's in the movie, I think is really true. And a lot of them, that there's like, they built so fast, and it's like takes the state a long time to be like, this is a city. It's going to have the services of a city. So there's like one county police officer, a sheriff who has to service all these areas. And there's no like.
By the way, my friend was a sheriff in Maricopa County.
Maricopa is like where it was the core of a lot of this stuff, and it is like they suddenly had like so many people, and they just like couldn't get deputies.
Right,
fast
there's no
enough.
schools in the movie.
Yeah, that's the thing. They would build a detail. I mean, they were like the developers. I remember reading once that developers would build elementary schools because elementary schools raise property values, and people want to live there. They wouldn't build any high schools because high schools depress property values. So all these, there were like literal cities that had no high school, and they had all these people moving in with young children, and there was just sort of like, well, fingers crossed, this is gonna.
They'll figure it out eventually. We already sold our houses.
Yeah, exactly. And it's just like,
well, so the obvious question is like, did you shoot at one of these places in one of these ghost? I mean, the movie has these scenes where Rosemary DeWitt and they're driving all over these empty looking houses.
I don't want to speak too much for the production team because like I was largely like, I went down. It was shot in Albuquerque, in New Mexico. Not
it wasn't
Arizona.
shot in Arizona.
That's a big lie. There's a few people. Sometimes I look online and people are like, "I won't see this movie because it's another like."
Sure.
Oh, I've been to Queens Creek. I fell for it.
Yeah, they look the same, but there are some Arizona people who are just like, "This is bullshit."
Yeah, the street sign does not look like an Arizona.
How dare you?
I grew up in Sacramento, and I feel a tiny bit that way about Lady Bird.
Yeah.
Just a touch.
Yeah. I didn't grow up in Sacramento, and I was a little bit like, it didn't feel like super authentic.
Yeah.
But I mean, I think like the thing that was craziest to me, I went down there before production started to do a few rewrites with Jonathan, the director, and I was talking to them about like, because I wrote it based on, like some articles I was reading, some stuff you just make up, but it was like the whole thing is sort of centered around a community that's on a golf course that's half finished, and like you have all these sort of overgrown lawns and empty swimming pools and all this half built.
There's a scene where a guy is painting lawns green.
Yeah, that was a real. that was in some article I read. Just like that was literally the detail that I was like, you have to make a movie about this. They were just like, they were so desperate to like. Everyone's trying to sell their houses, and the problem with like selling your house is like, even if you keep it nice, the 10 houses on your street are all just like being devoured by nature.
Right.
And they couldn't like plant and maintain lawns on.
And when you say nature, you mean the desert.
Right, the desert, yeah. But so they just were like just spray painting the other lawns green to try to be like, it's still a beautiful place here,
Right. And a lot of the comedy, especially in the opening in the movie, comes from that.
Yeah.
It's like the Rosemary DeWitt's character is a real estate agent that's trying to sell houses in a ghost town, and to talk about like the promise of this place that's like clearly
it's
has
just
no
collapsing,
promise.
and it's just like. But I remember like when I went down there for production, I talked to them. They'd like come back from some location scout, and I was talking to the DP, and he was just saying like, it's amazing. He's like, everything was easy to find, like this half finished golf course, these like abandoned McMansions with the like half finished pools in the back, and these big walls in the desert. Everything that you kind of invent to like is there. And then they were like, we just had one huge problem, which was like a key scene takes place on like what was scripted as a 2-story strip mall. Like it's a real estate office where the office is on the second floor of a strip mall with a
which is
railing.
kind of imperative for the plot.
Yeah, imperative for the plot. And they were like, there are no 2-story like strip malls in all of New Mexico, just none. And it was like,
built up
it's like the easiest thing. I mean, you drive around LA and you're like, you pass one every 6 seconds, and they were just like, there's none. We've canvassed the state, and they found second story like office building that could kind of be made maybe to look like a strip mall. And it's like the thing I never thought would cause any problems was like a total production
and
headache.
essential. It's like
yeah,
hard to
and
write
there was
around.
no way to not do
Yeah.
it. So it was like still like insane to me when I watch it. I'm just like, this is crazy.
Wait, so when they filmed it, they did kind of own the whole neighborhood? Like those were abandoned houses?
No, I think they were. I don't think so. I think they were mostly in people's houses. I think there were some of the like, I think they shot around. Like I think that the houses that they were actually inside were largely in neighborhoods, and then some of the sort of like that golf course was, and the sort of like collapsing tennis courts, I believe were sort of more areas that were like basically abandoned developments.
I mean, at a certain point, it's like the disadvantages of living in one of those towns are also the disadvantages of shooting there. Right?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I'm sort of like, I was so removed from production on it that I don't know. I don't know like too much of stories, but it was like, we're at Albuquerque, and it's like, they seem pretty well set up for,
Right.
like they seem set up for, they had so many big movies come through there, and the movie was written so specifically for at least the Southwest, not Albuquerque, but it was like, it wasn't Albuquerque doubling for Chicago or something. So it was kind of like, it seemed like it was a pretty great place to make the movie.
I'm curious actually about, you originated this whole idea that you're the writer of the movie. I gather you're unavailable to be there for the entire production, right?
Yeah.
Like, talk to us about what it's like to like kind of give your baby away in a weird way, whereas in TV, right?
Yeah.
Like you would be there the entire time.
It's really, really weird. Like I mean, the best thing is to like, again, write a script and then like have it sit around for 8 years and just totally forget about it. And then it got made, and part
It's
of
like
it
a
was
shithead teenager at this point.
Wait, so who's pushing it? You're not the one that's like saying, hey, read the script?
No. I had sort of like, when I wrote it originally, sent it out through like an agent, I had written it, as I said, like, I think I was just watching Eastbound and Down, so I had Danny's voice in my head, and I thought he'd be great for the character. And so I kind of wrote it clearly as a Danny McBride character. And I was a little like embarrassed by it, but I was also like, well, I should probably try and get it to him. And it got to Rough House, and they really liked it. And Danny was actually going to direct it for a while. And he had gone, like, all those guys went to film school, and Danny, I think he's talked about this, but he's like, he wanted to be a director and kind of fell into acting because he was in those David Gordon Green movies. And then he's just
supposed to fit.
Well, and even like All the Real Girls.
All the Real
like,
Girls.
Oh, yeah.
You see that movie, you're like, oh man, that guy is a movie star, and he's just like dumb buddy number 3.
Well, no, I mean, that's it's like Danny has no, like, I don't think he wanted to do it. He's just like one of the great actors of his generation. And so then he's done it. So I think he's always looked for like something to direct, and then gets pulled away because he's a movie star and a television star and in a billion things. And so he and I sort of worked on the script a little bit. And it was sort of set up, and then he had to go. It was unclear if Eastbound was going to end with season 3 or 4, and I think they signed on to do a 4th season, and we lost him to that because that takes like all his energy to star in and write and like make that television show. And so we sort of like fell apart, and then when he came up for air, we were still talking about it, but he had a billion other projects, and it just like, it kind of died as a project with him. And just because that's, I think, how what happens with most movies is they like peter out. And so I just do TV, and like it was sent out sometimes, like largely if I was ever trying to convince people that I could write something other than just straight comedy, it would go out, and sometimes it would find a director or someone would have read it somehow and contact me. But I kind of couldn't, like, there was no one was like offering to pay me a ton of money for it. It was just sort of like people asking me to give it to them for free or something, and I just couldn't get the idea of doing it with Danny out of my head, because at that point it was so like
so close, and then at some point he had a little break between projects. He was just like, oh, we were talking as a company about what we wanted to make, and we thought Arizona would be like a fun thing to make, and he had a really limited period, and he didn't have time to direct anymore, but he wanted to be in it. So they just kind of called me, and at that point I was like, sure, like, this is great. Like, someone's gonna make it. It took like, I hadn't thought about it for 2 years, and someone, and suddenly it was like in production, like months later, like 2 months later. But to answer the original question, it's weird being a writer, because, like I think, and I very like, I'm happy with the final film. I think Jonathan Watson, who directed it, who's worked with Danny and those guys a ton, like did a great job, but became immediately clear to me, you're like TV. And I had just, when it was made, I was coming off of a pilot that I had made where not only like it really was my show, and
you have a director, but it's like every decision goes to the writer. You know, the costumes get approved by the writer. The locations are like the writers are on the location scouts, and every single person on the set of a television show, like the vision that they're trying to execute is the writer's vision, and what the writer imagined when they wrote it. And you go to a film set and it's like it's just what it is. The vision they're trying to execute is the director's vision and what the director imagined when they read the script. You know, and it's like the script is a starting place that they build off of as opposed to the ending place. And that's just like, you always not grow up, but you go to film school and you are aware of the idea that like writers are bitter and writers all end up wanting to direct and writers hate it. And then like I sort of ended up in TV instead of film, and you're just like, I don't need to be a director. Like I always wanted to be a director. I went to film school. I thought I wanted to direct. And then you're in TV and you're like, on the shows where I'm an executive producer, but even before that, you have so much. The writers do the casting. You talk about the props, come up to the office. You're okaying stuff. Like you're the ones who are talking about the look of the show. We all like listen to music. Like you have so much input as a writer, and you're like, I don't need to be down on set like lining up shots, and I certainly don't need to be in like a scout van for 3 days and like stressing out about that stuff. It's like I still get to like see my.
You get all of the good parts of
good
directing, or what you one imagines
TV
directing.
writers,
Yeah.
I mean, it's really fun to like. I think. You know, like put a sequence together is really fun, but also like I'd say as TV writers, you're not surprised by the finished product. Like everything you get to say yes or no. Like the writing staff and the showrunners who are writers like get to say yes or no to stuff. And so I was just like, I don't want to direct. And then you see a movie and you're just sort of like the movie gets going. And these guys were great to me. Like I didn't get rewritten. I didn't like, they would make changes to the script like. Mostly based on production concerns about the budget and what they had found location-wise. But there was no, like, I didn't feel like anything but a total partner. But still, they're just like, they're not calling me every, like, 5 minutes to, like, ask me about casting. And they're not, like, sending me photos of like, the locations
where's
they
the
found.
show and tell?
Yeah,
right?
exactly. They're like they're off making it. And I can sort of, like, I'd get updates and I'd call them and we'd chat about it. But it was like, that's just not the role of a writer on a lot of feature films, I think,
Right.
Because I think I had as good an experience as you can have as a writer. Like they were very
it kind of sounds like it. Yeah.
like collaborative and super appreciative. And I never felt like they're ruining my words, but you're also like, yeah, it's just, you have to sort of be like, okay, like this is someone else is going to make it. And like, I hope it turns out good,
It's interesting to hear.
But I do like, I do now understand why feature writers all end up like wanting to direct, because you're just like, and again, I had a very good experience on this movie, but you could easily be a bad one. You could easily, like things, how you can see how, especially in a world where you get rewritten by writers you never meet, like how you just end up being like, oh shit, if I don't take control of my career, it's just endlessly going to be like my name on projects that I don't want to vouch for,
Right. One of the first jobs I did when I moved to LA was I was a dolly grip on a short film set that David Benioff was directing. He had like made 25th Hour come out and Troy, I think. And he like really was unhappy with Troy, and he's like told Warner Brothers, he's like, I want to direct this because it just didn't come out the way I imagined it. And they're like, well, you've never directed anything.
Yeah.
So he adapted one of his short stories, and you could tell on set, like he obviously cared about the details, but he didn't care. Like it didn't seem like he enjoyed finding angles of the camera and, kind of telling the actors to like hit their marks, like those real technical things.
There has to be a joy in getting dirty. Like your joke about like spending 3 days, in a scout van, like you have to find that romantic,
You have to like it. No, I mean, it's all very interesting, but it's also like, I think the reality is probably like also the best case scenario is just that writers like that directors, that TV, that the film industry learns to like appreciate writers a little more, because I think the reality is it's like the director should be doing all that stuff, but if you just have writers sort of like more engaged in the process and you take them a little more seriously as authors of things, I think it would be better. Like everything would turn out better,
That's so funny because I was thinking the exact opposite.
Yeah. That writers should appreciate directors more.
Or rather like, because, Oren and I have done a lot of like, digital series, which kind of have a weird in betweenness to them where, like you'll do a Go 90 show or something, rest in peace. And the writers don't know anything about production at all.
Yeah.
And so it kind of becomes a little bit more of a film model where I made all of the decisions on that Go 90 show.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And
wow. Just saying that.
Yeah, I know. I mean, ooh la la.
I did a Go 90 show.
Who's going to be mad
There were
at
the
you?
showrunners were TV people. They'd come from traditional TV, and they were very much like that, talking to the actors on set.
Yeah.
Looking at props, telling me like, this is how this performance should happen, like being at rehearsals.
And when I think
I liked it personally.
Yeah, and I love to collaborate, so it wouldn't have been a problem no matter what.
Matt's a real tyrant.
I'm a real piece of shit. But but the thing that really it kind of boils down to is, does a writer have an understanding of production or not?
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And I think a TV writer, you just inherently have to, right? Like for all the reasons you were describing before, you're in it for so long that like you learn.
Yeah, I mean, like certainly
everything,
you have to understand the I think the best thing about TV writers is, all the writers have producer credits, which is like a little dumb. It was just a way of like giving people or giving people promotions without giving them raises and stuff. But I do think like for writers, I mean, I think about this for me, even writing this movie, like it's really helpful as a TV writer. Like you are taught to think like a producer. We don't write anything without thinking about what it's going to cost. You don't write anything without thinking about locations, and that can be limiting because like sometimes I think coming out of when you step away from TV, certainly like network TV where it's so rigid, I could find myself being like, oh yeah, I don't have to just like, I can just write, like if I'm just writing something on spec or whatever, I can be like, I could just say whatever I wanted. Like I don't have to like freak out about
blow that up, but
yeah.
Give me 50 extras, who cares?
But at the same time, I think a lot of, a thing I find, again, to come back to like reading people's samples and stuff is like, it's troubling to me sometimes when you read young writers, if you're going to hire them and you just feel like, oh, they haven't considered at all like the producibility of this. And because that is a real skill that we look for, is like to understand production. And certainly like, I think it helps in writing independent movies, at least. A thing that I was really drawn to with this idea was not just that it was like a really evocative location, but I was like, it's a world that can be very depopulated. You don't need a ton of extras. It's like, you don't need, the movie sort of takes place inside one gated community. It's like a very closed off location. It didn't need a ton of stuff, and it is still
cinematic at the same time.
Yeah, and it's still cinematic. And I think like for me, I was able to write it thinking, just because you're taught to think about that stuff, like be able to write something that was at least very producible.
There is one scene, and I'm curious, I guess you weren't on set probably when it was shot, but there's a scene where quite a few structures are on fire. Was that?
Yes, at the end there's there's a really big fire. I'm not the person to ask about this. I saw an early cut of the movie that was less impressive before some of the fire effects were like added in post. So some of it is for sure, digitally enhanced. But I think they did a
lot of the fire looked really real, especially close up to the characters.
Yeah, I mean, I thought they did that stuff. They did a really good job. I'm sure they did some of it practically, and some of it some of it is sort of like done in post. But I don't have the proper answers. But it was like, that is the thing you write and you're like, oh boy, like I don't know how it's gonna turn out.
Good luck for these guys.
Yeah, I mean, I also wrote a crazy scene in the original draft where they were buried underground with 400 ground squirrels, attacking in a small cavern that was filling up with squirrels, and then the squirrels were on fire, and it was a scene that was great. I loved it so much, and the first thing when I met with Danny and everyone with the script, everyone's like, I mean, we have to change that squirrel scene. They're just like, I mean, that's just not, what are you even picturing?
Right. Draw a picture of how this
yeah, no, it's just well, and then it became a scene with a coyote, and then the wrangling coyotes was too expensive and too difficult, and so the coyotes fell out of the movie too.
That's cool. So how involved were you in selecting the director? Or not at all?
I mean, I wasn't I ultimately the script had sort of, I had optioned it originally to Danny, and then after a 2-year option or whatever, and I think they'd picked it up. And then when we were trying to get it made originally, and then when it looked like it wasn't going to get made, it had reverted to me. And so I had ownership of the script. And so I was sort of just when those guys came to me, it was sort of up to me if I wanted to sell the script to them again or not, or option it to them to get it made. So they sort of presented me with I was going to basically say yes to anything because I just like having Danny in it was what I wanted. And we talked about directors, but they had this guy, Jonathan, he's his credits are insane when you look at them as an assistant director. He's worked worked for like Peter Weir and just and he's
awesome.
just and he's also but he's largely been recently he works with Danny and David Gordon Green, and he works with like Seth Rogen and Evan Goldberg. He's their AD a lot. I think he's and he's been sort of in and around this world of these like tonally like very daring comedies, and I think that. I think Danny they had been looking for something to give. They felt like he should have something to direct, and they'd been looking for something for him. And so, I just sort of like, I met him. He seemed nice. He seemed like he got it. But a lot of it was like, well, if this is Danny's guy, you're like,
right.
That's sort of what because it's such a tricky tone, I think. And I felt confident that even no matter who the director was, I was like, I feel like if you have Danny, I know what that main like central performance is going to be, and so that was sort of like my concern was like, I didn't know who else could do that.
Yeah. I love Rosemary DeWitt.
She's
too.
great.
She, really
she was like a late
addition too.
She's so good in it. And like, so in what I feel like is for sure an underwritten character. Like it's hard. And it's, like she brought so much to it.
And do you know how it was financed? Like, did they pretty much figure it out?
Yeah. I mean, they pretty much figured it out. I mean, I think those guys, I don't know how much. I shouldn't speak for any of their decision making. They are guys who've like made things very independently. They've made big studio things. I don't know how much is like a preference for how much they like to work, how much is like what the interest for something like this was. They ended up sort of financing it through this company Imperative that's been like was able to sort of make it, and it's not a huge budget, but it's like I think time was really tight. I mean the only. All the sort of creative compromise on the movie, and there's a lot that got cut out from scripts was all just about they just didn't have the days,
Right. I did notice Danny McBride has like crazy hair in it. It's like bleached blonde. Was that for this role, or was
that's for this role? That was they always had the sort of like frosted tips, like like little afro. That was 100% like that's Jonathan, the director. He like had a vision for how he wanted Danny to look, and like I came down there and it was like that exactly. It was great.
She just like kind of unhinged Guy Fieri, basically.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah,
that's exactly what it is. As if Guy Fieri is chasing you around an abandoned community trying to kill you and your daughter.
As if Guy Fieri is that hinged.
That's what the log line should be. It should be.
Yeah. Guy Fieri chooses, real estate instead of food. Well, do you have anything else coming up?
Oh boy.
Are you pretty?
No, I mean, we're just like back to Brooklyn like right now. So we're doing season 6 of that, and we're I'm technically writing episode 6 this week, and we're sort of rewriting episode 3 and 4 in the office, and
you're doing press for Arizona.
And I'm doing press for Arizona, and it's very exciting.
Just podcasts, just like podcasts every day, just chilling out.
No, it's very exciting. Nobody ever wants to talk to writers,
Well, we do. We actually started this podcast.
Can you guys tell that I'm like have a real anger about how writers are treated?
Have you never done
really.
like the
Nerdist Writers panel?
No,
I know. Really?
No. I mean, I don't know. I mean, like again, it's like I don't know why anyone. I don't think anyone would want to talk to me ever. Like it's a
what everyone. Well, I mean, I guess the joke about writers is that like they don't have fans, but they have people who want their jobs. Right?
Yes, exactly. I think
so people are like, and that's kind of I think it's largely true about most directors as well.
Yeah.
Like nobody knows. Like Michelle MacLaren, who you named as this kind of like hotshot, amazing director that does like the best episodes of Game of Thrones. Like I bet you most Game of Thrones fans have no idea who she is.
Yeah, for sure.
But as filmmakers and people that are interested in like creative work, like it's just real fascinating to see how you build this stuff.
It's very. I mean, TV writers are also really weird because I mean it's just really weird to know because it's a very collaborative thing. We write shows as a group, and like it is very. I mean. your name is on an episode, it doesn't mean you went off and came up with the idea and then like wrote it. It's like it's broken as a group. You figure out the story. It's part of a larger arc that was figured out as a group. You get assigned it randomly. Usually they just sort of like, you go through an order of seniority, you assign out the episodes.
Yeah, I mean it's fascinating, but it's great. We haven't actually had like that many TV writers on the podcast, so it's like really awesome to hear your perspective.
Cool. I mean, the only problem for me is that like whatever advice I have for like people on TV writers, it's completely different. Like the industry now from where it was, like whatever lessons I might have had from 15 years ago are like useless. It's an entirely different business now.
Right. But I do think like if you're a director listening to this podcast and your favorite show on TV is Brooklyn Nine-Nine and your dream is to direct it, I think hearing this might make you realize like, oh, it's probably not going to happen.
I mean, it might. I mean, I think it's more just, again, like we're a network sitcom and they're very controlled, but increasingly on TV, there's so many smaller shows that are like with lower budgets, but also like that are giving opportunities to people both behind the camera, in front of the camera, that who would never have been able to like, or who would have had to struggle to get TV jobs before, who now have opportunities. And they're not always like the nice, stable network TV money, but there's like intense opportunities for people out there, and I think in TV directing, there's like huge, like as I understand it, at least there's like huge new openings that weren't there 3 years ago,
Yeah, for sure. But I think like probably the best way into a show like Brooklyn Nine-Nine is you write some great scripts, and you get them to Luke.
Well, there's also there's feeders as well, right? Like all of the studios have like their own kind of mentorship programs.
Yeah, we've hired we've hired some people this year through like programs of theirs and stuff. They're very good about pushing their people, especially on the director side.
Oh, cool.
Awesome.
Well, thanks so much for talking to us. And Arizona again comes out. Well, it'll be out by the time this podcast is out, and it's available on iTunes and VOD and everywhere. You can
check it out. I guess
movies.
Yeah. Dig in.
So before you leave, we're going to do our final segment, which is Unpaid Endorsements.
Unpaid Endorsements.
Oren, what you got?
I'm going to endorse something I don't even have, but my friend has it, and my friends have it. They're a couple, and they're so big into it, and I'm going to buy one very soon that I'm going to endorse it. I'm pretty into sensible gun control regulations, but this is a gun. It's called Bug Assault, the original salt gun. You can get it on Amazon. It's $40, and you load it with salt and you shoot it at flies in your house, and they die instantly. Sorry to.
And you have to sweep up the salt?
No, the salt just like kind of disintegrates. They have a version 2.0, more power and greater accuracy with less salt per shot. It's crazy, and it works.
Does the salt disintegrate or just spread out so much that it's hard to tell that you're standing in bug salt? That doesn't make sense to me, right?
Our friends who said it, one of them has been on the podcast before, Bramley, said that they don't have to clean anything up and that it's like super effective. It's like way easier than a fly swatter. So cool. You got anything, Matt?
Yeah. Actually, do you guys know about this company called Ben? B-E-N, like the name Ben?
No, it's a horrible name for a company, though.
So they do product placement for indie movies. So they kind of basically play matchmaker to I've got this movie Arizona, and we really need money. So what if you sponsored the hair bleach that Danny McBride's character uses in the movie, and then like you get a little bit of cash or maybe like in-kind sort of trades, and it's a good way to kind of just find a little bit of money, a little bit of resources for your movie, basically. So they, like I said, they kind of play matchmaker to help you with that sort of stuff.
And it's an acronym, I think, right? Branded Entertainment Network.
There you go.
Ben.
I just thought it was a guy named Ben.
Integration experts.
Yeah.
Oh, cool. That's like the type of thing that like every time you're trying to raise money for an indie movie, you like tell your potential investors, and we're going to get like product placement. We're going to get all this, and then it never happens.
It never happens. But like, sometimes it happens, sometimes it doesn't. But things like, especially if you're doing something small, like getting coffee from Starbucks in exchange for a few tweets, like could be worthwhile. You know? So
no, these guys got Jose Cuervo into Fuller House.
There you go. Exactly.
Cool. Their tagline is "Been there, done that."
Not bad.
Pretty
So
cool.
Ben.
Ben just the name Ben?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Ben.productplacement.com, right?
Yep.
Is that the website?
That's it.
They didn't think the name through. So
Well, it's branded branded entertainment network. So
Yeah.
Ben. Oh, they do stuff with Ellen. Cool. Luke, you got anything?
I really don't.
Are you watching any cool shows, reading any good books?
I've been watching a lot of 90 Day Fiance. It's great. I really highly recommend 90 Day Fiance.
What channel is it on?
Oh God, I don't even know. I've been my wife has largely been buying it on iTunes, but it is. I think it's TLC.
You are spending money on 90 Day Fiancé.
Yeah, and I pay for cable. I could record it, but I don't. I'm buying it because I missed episodes. It's about couple. It's largely men and women who have gone overseas to basically purchase, not always to purchase, but to find
to meet a person,
to find people to come back and marry, and they have they're on 90-day fiance visas, and so it's a reality show as they try to navigate those 90 days and decide if they are often going to get married and if they can get approval for the marriage. And it's just real. I mean, it's bleak in a way that I just I am in love with.
I'm sensing a trend or I'm picking up on something in your personality.
It's really, really terrific. And I think there's been there's years of it now. So if you start, no one season that I've tried is better than the other. They're all terrific. But if you fall into it and like it, it's months of entertainment.
What kind of person is you know what will make this whole experience even better is if a camera crew followed me around. They go with them?
They go with them. I mean, I think I've wondered that because it obviously there's no end to the people who people just want to be on camera.
Sure.
That's just I don't think there's a lot of thought into it, but I think there's a little bit of travel involved. You have to find your way to Odessa to meet this woman, or, or you have to the season I've been watching has this woman, she had to go to Morocco for a while to bring this handsome young man back home with her. And I'm sure that the show sort of pays for some of that. And,
Gotcha.
And I bet they also help them navigate the visa process in a way that is, I'm sure, expensive if you have to get your own immigration lawyer. Anyway, it's terrific.
People will do anything for love.
Yeah, it's not, love is a very charitable reading of what is going on. But, can I do the opposite of a endorsement?
Sure. Yeah,
I just get so mad at Final Draft every day, and I just would love it if Final Draft was a better program.
Have you tried Highland 2?
The problem is when you work in actual production, you can't just choose your own
Sure, but Highland 2 will spit out at an FTX file. Have you tried it at all?
I haven't tried it at all. I would be everyone is so regimented on production about what you choose to use. It might be exactly the same, but it's and the things that Final Draft does really well that a lot of the other programs don't do well is it handles production stuff terrifically for TV shows, but its writing experience is just I write them constantly with complaints about you can't, if dual dialogue is you can't edit dual dialogue without undueling. It's so crazy. It's the most simple thing that they could fix it so easily, and they won't. And it's just it's been 8 years of me being mad about this, and this is finally someone to listen to.
You should tweet that at John or at Craig Mazin.
I know.
Boy, they love shitting on
and they've had the Final Draft people on a couple times.
I mean, it's such a bad program. I mean, and I'm sympathetic because obviously, there aren't that many people who actually use it. The incentive to rebuild it from the ground up is because it's 5,000 users total of Final Draft, and even if some of those users are giant corporations who can afford crazy license fees, it's still there's no it's not a financial business model that makes sense. But
the owner of Final Draft was on Script Notes, and he said he went to India because it's the number one. That's their number one market is India, and he said the entire country of India has bought 3 licenses or something. Yeah, it's 100% bootlegged over there.
But that's the thing. Year after year, new editions of Final Draft come out, and year after year, the only real improvements have been to guard against piracy.
Right.
Which I get, and I always want to buy it, and I don't want to steal the software, but just slight tweaks to the user experience would be great too.
Right.
That story map, though, man. You use the story map all the time.
Constantly. So helpful.
And the collab tools. So if we want to find out more about you, do you tweet or anything?
I'm on Twitter. I think it's at Tredici, LDELTREDICI, but I don't really ever tweet. I just lurk. But Yeah, watch it with Brooklyn Nine-Nine. Will be on NBC at some time.
Is there a type of joke that we see that we know is like coming from you?
No, it's so like that's. My parents are always like, that joke, that was your joke. It's like, no, it's like, you can't.
No, you're like, I tried to get that joke out of there.
But even the idea that anyone pitched one joke, it's like every joke is someone pitches a joke that's funny, and then someone else pitches like a slightly better tweak on the structure, right. On the same structure, and then somebody is like, or what if we added this little thing, and that thing's the funniest, and then you table read it, and then like clearance says like, we can't make fun of that celebrity, and so you change it to something else, and the joke is like, it's a mishmash of influence by the time it airs. It's like the idea that anyone gets anything other than like individual words through to a script is like a myth. Thank you guys so much for having me.
Yeah, thanks so much. You can learn more about the show at justshootitpod.com. You can follow us on all social media through Just Shoot It Pod. You can follow me at Mr. Matt Enlow.
And me at Smitey Pyleg. And if you have any comments or anything, email us at justshootitpod@gmail.com. This episode was edited by Jay McAuliffe. Our producer is Madeline Rosewatt. And our webmaster is Ewan Williams. And the music you're listening to is from the artist Jahzzar and the Free Music Archive. Thanks.
Thanks so much, Mike.